Coming to you directly from Sydney, Australia, welcome to the Maple Roo podcast. This show is powered by Maple Roo, the all-natural sports nutrition brand in collaboration with Maple from Canada. Because if it's not 100% organic maple syrup from Quebec, Canada, it's not the real deal. Eric, this is the first podcast. How exciting is this?
It's very exciting. You know, we've been working on this for quite a long time now. So to see it come to life, it's very exciting.
Tell us, what is the podcast about? What can people expect?
Yeah, so we wanted to do a podcast that was, aimed for people that want to train better, so improve their training and also improve their nutrition. So the concept is pretty simple. We want to bring a guru in their field, so a researcher or a leader in a certain topic to come and talk to us, talk to athletes, and answer some of our questions.
Amazing. And I want to know, is it just for elite athletes or can weekend warriors join the party?
Yeah, it's for everyone. We wanted to do a podcast that was simple for people that want to get more information on how to train better, how to eat better, and if they're doing their first 10K or half marathon or full marathon, and also get some information in there that are going to be really good for people that are elite athletes that are looking to do podiums on their next race.
Amazing. What have we got in store for episode 1?
So for our first episode, we're pretty lucky. We wanted to start with a bang. So obviously Maple Roo is all about eating organic, eating well. So I've reached out to one of the gurus in sports nutrition and somebody that's been studying how to fuel properly in order to reach peak performance. So we're very lucky we have Dr. Jonathan Tremblay joining us in our first episode. I know he's fairly new to probably the Australian audience, but you'll see he's got great experience. And I think everyone can learn a little bit from Jonathan.
Amazing. Let's get into it.
So let's welcome Dr. Jonathan Tremblay, professor at the School of Kinesiology and Exercise Science within the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Montreal in Canada. His research focuses on exercise physiology, bioenergetics, sports performance, and sports nutrition. Dr. Tremblay, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So Dr. Tremblay, maybe we could start with a quick introduction on yourself, your role at the University of Montreal, and information about some of the research you've completed.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm an exercise physiologist by trade. I've been teaching and doing research at the University of Montreal for the past 15 years, and recently in the last year or so, a bit more than that, I've joined the Montreal Heart Institute as well, and I'm also part of a group of data scientists in Montreal, which is called IVADO, or l'Institut de Valorisation des Données. And I've been working with elite sport for about 20 years. I was the director of sports science at the Institute of Sport, the Quebec Institute of Sports, for 5 years. That's more than 10 years ago. I started as an amateur athlete in canoe kayak, slalom canoe kayak. Then I moved on to being a strength conditioning coach and worked with different sports, figure skating, canoe kayaks, alpine skiing, windsurfing. And then I moved on to a physiologist role, exercise physiologist role with some teams, and then eventually more as a general sports scientist, helping teams organize and do science properly.
Oh, and if I understand correctly,
sorry, go ahead.
You also have a little bit of experience here in Australia.
Yes, I've been to Australia in 2019. I was working with a tennis player for a tournament in January before the Australian Open, Canadian player. And I was supposed to be working also with a team of researchers at the Victoria University with the Western Bulldogs. And but the thing is, something happened in March or early March of 2020 that kind of abruptly stopped our collaboration, and so I had to come back to Canada. But I had a great time for the few months I was in Australia.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we all remember what happened then, and we would just want to move on from there. Perfect.
Exactly.
So, Dr. Tremblay, maybe tell us a little bit of some of the research that you've completed.
Yeah, well, my background is in exercise physiology, and my research during my thesis, and I continued on over the years, is on fuel selection during exercise. So how we use different fuels, so carbohydrates, lipids, proteins during exercise, and how sex affects it, how exercise mode affects it, different types of carbohydrates or different doses of carbohydrates affect it. This is one area of my research. I'm also exploring more recently in the last 5 to 6 years, the effect of eccentric cycling. So that's a new mode of exercise, a new modality that's becoming popular in clinical settings and also for athletes. And so we're looking at the effects on performance and endurance performance, and also on fuel selection, on how we use fuels during exercise. Another aspect is the mathematical modeling of exercise bioenergetics. So understanding how energy is being supplied during exercise, but trying to model this mathematically and being able to predict performance from the sprint to the marathon. And also as my work as a director of sports science, and maybe 10 years ago, I've collaborated with many people in different areas, and so I've also participated in some projects on motor task consolidation, monitoring training load in hockey players, preventing shoulder injuries in swimmers. So there's been a lot of different work that I've been involved with, but my expertise is mostly on the sport nutrition, exercise, fuel selection during exercise.
What I like about your experience is you've worked with many athletes in different sports. Is there maybe one insight that you found about performance and nutrition that stands out of everything that you've researched?
Sure. Actually, it's kind of an interesting insight. I think many sports scientists that I've worked with, at least sport, could kind of find some support there. Is that I think it's not specific to nutrition. It's general to sports science, but I think no amount of sports science knowledge outweighs the human connection with an athlete or a coach. And so that's always interesting, because when you start off, you think, oh, I'm going to gather as much knowledge as I can. But you realize that the human connection has much more impact than any form of knowledge you can gather. And I've seen many athletes crush PBs, personal bests, with flawed training, because they trusted the voice of their coach and the voice of the staff that was with them over, and that guided them over the data, actually. And so that's interesting insight. Yeah.
Good. So, Dr. Tremblay, I moved to Australia 3 years ago, and people laughed at me a little bit when they saw me training with maple syrup before an Ironman event or an ultra event, and so on. So, obviously, maple syrup is not as known here in Australia as it is in Canada and North America. So, maybe explain from a high level, what is maple syrup? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, sure. So maple syrup is something that's very common here in Quebec. We're the biggest producers in the world. Maple syrup actually starts with maple trees. So the Canadian leaf is actually a maple leaf, and so usually sugar maples in late winter or early spring when sap flows. So that's the water that's produced by the tree itself. There's a small hole that's drilled into the tree, and the spout is inserted. Sap is collected in buckets or tubes as it drips out, and this is driven by temperature swings. The watery sap that contains about 2% sugar is then boiled down, and that evaporates most of the water until it's concentrated into syrup. And that syrup contains about 66 to 68% sugar. It's filtered and that's bottled, and that's what you get on the shelf in the supermarket. And typically it takes about 40 liters of sap to make about 1 liter of syrup.
Okay, interesting.
That's the overall process, yeah.
And why is it more and more popular with athletes now? What's so powerful about maple syrup that even here in Australia, I saw some news about maple syrup with the benefits and things like that. So why globally are people talking about maple syrup?
Well, I think maple syrup stands out as an ideal, some sort of an ideal energy source for athletes due to its high sucrose content. So it has a high level of sugar, but this sucrose, along with the different biological elements that are present there, they digest quickly and they deliver rapid fuel during exercise. And so this is paired with some trace minerals like potassium and manganese that are also present. These are argued sometimes to support muscle function, but the dose is fairly small when you take it, in a maple syrup shot. So we don't know it has much of an effect more than the carbohydrates. But so there's unpublished work from our lab that been using 13C or carbon 13 labeled glucose or sucrose that shows that when we ingest it at 60 grams per hour, which is the recommended dose in general during prolonged exercise, maple syrup is well oxidized, so it's well used by the body, and this is used just as efficiently as glucose or other commercial sports drinks. So this is interesting. For the same dose and concentration, it's used the same as other sports drinks. It's just as effective as powering muscles. There's no compromise really so far with the same dose. We also had a study that was done in 2020 that showed that it lowered perceived exertion during over 2 hours of exercise. So despite having a lower palatability, so that means that the taste was not as good, but the perception of effort was lower after 2 hours, slightly lower. It's a small effect. And also we did some studies, also another study that we published in 2019 that showed that maple syrup matches glucose and other sports drinks for enhancing cognitive flexibility, so decision making during fatigue states. And so when you do intense exercise, intense sprints repeatedly, you're in a state where your decision making is affected, and we see that maple syrup actually can contribute the same as any other sugar or the other sugars, the main sugars that are available in commercial drinks, in order to boost mental capacities in these contexts. So that's why I think it could be perceived as an interesting product, as an interesting solution, and a natural solution for people that want to explore different solutions for exercise performance.
Yeah, and I've been attending more and more events, and it's interesting to see that people are telling me they need to go to work the next day, and at the end of the day, they just want to have something that's going to be gut friendly, natural, organic, so that way they don't have to feel sick after a race or even during a race. So do you also see athletes telling you like, hey, the performance is important, but I want to eat more natural, more organic? Is that, do you see a trend in the sports world?
Yeah, well, the recommendations in general for athlete population, but also the population in general, is to eat less transformed foods. And I think this goes along with this recommendation. Maple syrup is fairly natural. It's a very small process, which we just boil the sap, and that's pretty much the only process that there is. And so yeah, it's very popular because it's a combo of performance and appeal, for the natural appeal and also providing performance benefits. And so that's very interesting for athletes, I think, both for weekend warriors and for professional athletes.
Oh, no, that's great. And what the stats that even surprised me is there's over $15 million spent on the research of maple syrup. So I know it's fairly new in Australia, but this is not new globally, right?
Well, it's new. There's not a lot of research in humans. So there's been a lot of research on maple syrup with animals over the years, and there's been research, fairly recent research that's been done with humans in clinical settings. My studies that we did in my lab, in my knowledge were the first. But I have a collaborator also in Quebec City that also did a study that was published last year in the Journal of Nutrition that shows that if you substitute maple syrup, actually 5% of the sugar that you have in your diet with maple syrup, you lower blood pressure a bit. You get better gut bacteria, which could contribute also to better absorption and better health in general. And you also lower blood glucose chronically. And so this shows benefits for health and not just for sport. So there's still more to be done. It's fairly limited studies. There's still more. It needs to be reproduced, but it seems promising for now.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you want to deep dive a little bit more into what you're currently working on and tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so my lab is currently exploring, further exploring the effect of maple syrup on performance. Right now, we're collaborating with the Quebec maple syrup producers and the Quebec Cycling Federation. We have an NSERC Alliance grant that allows us to do some research over 5 years on this topic. So we have two main phases of the project. The first phase explores the dose response relationship. So to see, we've seen in the past in our lab that with 60 grams per hour we see the same effect as with other sources of carbohydrate, but we know that sucrose is better absorbed, so we think that by giving a larger dose we should see an even better effect on performance, an even greater effect on performance. So the idea is to give increasing dose of maple syrup during prolonged cycling, and see the effect on performance. So we have time trials and time to exhaustion tests that will allow us to measure performance in the lab, and that's going to be combined with stable isotope tracing to be able to really measure how much of this maple syrup is being oxidized and contribute to performance. So we know that the performance is not linked to another factor, but it's really linked to the actual carbohydrate in the maple syrup. We also will measure different perceptual responses, so taste and gut well-being and gut disturbances during these efforts, because we know that taking carbohydrates, especially in hot environments, we won't test that in this study, but if you take carbohydrates during prolonged exercise and you have to sustain a high power output, you typically have gut issues. So you'll feel that you feel some bloating, you'll feel you feel bad a bit. So we want to see how, in the past, we've seen that it's been very well accepted by the athletes. So we want to measure this again and over more strenuous performance tests. And then a second phase that we want to explore, one of my colleagues, which is more an expert in neuroscience, is we want to look at the effect of maple syrup ingestion on mental fatigue. So during prolonged exercise and prolonged cycling, there's also mental fatigue that prevents us from making the right decisions, that prevents us from actually continuing exercise as well. So we'll do different types of tests. Like one is a Stroop test, which is a mental flexibility test, and we'll test with the optimal dose. So once we do the first part of the study, we'll find what's the optimal dose that gets oxidized and gets used and allows for better performance. And then with that dose, we'll try to see how we can improve performance and prevent mental fatigue. And so it combines both the physiological and psychological aspects of performance, and so that's why it's very interesting. And the work we did so far allows us to think that maple syrup can actually rival commercial products and as a natural alternative for athletes. So that's the goal.
Well, that's interesting. And again, just a little personal story here. I've been doing Ironmans for 10 years, and recently in New Zealand, it was my first full Ironman that I used our, maple syrup product out of maple roux, and I never felt so good. So I know that's why I'm so passionate about it, because, I felt great, felt strong, even qualified for world championship, little humble brag here, but for me, the most important thing is after the race, I felt great compared to other races before that, your stomach is upset, you can't eat, and so on. So for me, I know it's working, and it's great to see that there's research out there that it's not just Eric Poulain saying it's working. There's research and with top athletes around the world, and so that's very interesting to me. So to kind of conclude this, and thank you for your time again. What's the future of maple syrup? Like where do you see the studies going? And I know you talked to me about so many interesting projects that you're thinking about. So where do you see the future of maple syrup?
I think we need to explore taking maple syrup, but maybe because for athletes, maple syrup alone might not be enough. We might need to add some electrolytes, for example. We might need to add other or enhance some substances that are present in maple syrup, some bioactive substances that we need to increase in content. So these are things that some of my colleagues are working on with animal studies right now, and we'll need to see if there's a benefit that to try it in humans eventually. So yeah, I think we need to also reproduce these. I shouldn't be the only researcher looking at the maple syrup. I think it should be reproduced elsewhere. We should see similar results. This is the one great quality of science, is when it can be replicated. It shows that the science is solid, and so we want to show the benefits for as providing energy, but also as hydrating, the benefit for hydration. So for that, again, it needs to be combined maybe with the other substances and electrolytes or minerals, and maybe trying it in different environments, in hot environments like you have in Australia, or in altitude, or in different settings that might also show benefits of maple syrup. Where, for example, in altitude and in hot environments, typically your gut is more sensitive, or it's irritable, a bit more irritable. So you want to have something that's going to be well tolerated, and so these environments might be good context for maple syrup.
That's a great segue, because our next podcast is going to be with Dr. Julien Perriard, who's the guru in training in hot weather. And so that's going to be our next podcast. So I think you didn't even know about it, but thanks for the segue. And what's interesting is when I came to Australia, I wanted to bring a research team that knew nothing about maple syrup, and just in order to combine. So we work with the University of Canberra and the Sports and Nutrition Research Center in order to, like you said, to combine maple syrup with other products to make it even more powerful. So that's what we did here. So Dr. Tremblay, thank you very much. This was great, and I've got a feeling that we'll do this more often. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time. I know it's late back in Canada now, but I wanted to thank you for this. We really appreciate it.
All right, no problem. It was a pleasure, Eric. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Maple Roo podcast. If you enjoyed it, there's so many more amazing guests to come, so click follow for free. Leaving a review helps others find the podcast, and for more information about Maple Roo and what it can do for you, visit mapleroo.au.